Welcome to this episode of the 1600 Sessions. I'm Stuart McLaurin, president of the White House Historical Association. This week, we're convened in Dallas, Texas for the Presidential Sites Summit, where we brought presidential sites from all over the country. These are birthplaces, childhood homes, libraries, museums, sites of all types that are all about teaching the stories of these 45 men who have been presidents of the United States of America. Well, there's another group we've convened with us this week, and that's our next gen leaders. These young leaders are from every sector of business, sports, entertainment, the arts, and every other sector, and are really our partners to help deploy the mission of the White House Historical Association more widely than it's ever been spread before, particularly to a younger generation. So let's meet my 8 friends today, and we'll get into a great conversation.
Thank you, Stuart. My name is Emily Bedard. I live and work in New York City. I am a sculptor by trade, and I am the creative director at Foster Reeve Ornamental Plaster in Brooklyn, New York. I have collaborated with 2 former White House decorators, and I was recommended to be a part of this group and share my expertise.
Well, that's terrific.
My name is Royce Dickerson. I'm a lifetime lover of history and politics. I'm a current MBA candidate at the University of Alabama. I've always been passionate about not only business, but bridging business and education together, and so excited to be here, and thank you for convening us all.
Great. Thank you, Royce. Genevieve?
I'm Genevieve Belair. I'm in the tech sector in New York now, but grew up in Potomac, Maryland, and have been a lifelong learner and studier of the presidency.
I'm Giacomo Ferragamo. I'm a junior at Georgetown, and I'm interning in the publications department at the association right now.
Terrific.
I'm Tyler Burkhart. I'm a sophomore at the University of Texas at Dallas, and aside from being a longtime history buff, I got interested in presidential sites after interning with the Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation last year.
I'm Lindsay Moynihan. I'm originally from Connecticut, but I live in Maryland right now where I go to school. I'm a history student at the University of Maryland, and I'm also interning with National History Day, and our executive director sits on the board of education for the White House Historical Association.
My name is Sean Sandrock. I'm currently a student of President Reagan's alma mater, Eureka College, and I'm actually here representing his birthplace in Tampico, Illinois, where I give tours.
My name's Dean Vu, and I'm from University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth. So I found that this really interesting to know more about American history and White House history. That's why I registered for the event, and I'm here today.
Well, thank you all for joining me for this conversation. You're an inspiration to me, and I'm excited about the work we're going to do together in the future. Well, Emily, let's begin with you. You've been at all of the sessions this week. Tell me which one you found the most interesting and compelling.
Sure. The very first panel discussion with the chiefs of staff of former first ladies and presidents was very interesting to me. It was such an intimate group to hear a discussion with these people who had such intimate relationships with those presidents and first ladies, and understanding how the role that they played in tending to the human behind that position, and making sure that they're there every day to make sure that those leaders are coming to work in an optimistic mindset, and that those chiefs of staff have one client, the First Lady and the President.
Anyone else?
The first panel, I think, was fascinating, getting to hear from those chiefs of staff. But one of the other panels that I found really interesting was yesterday's panel on the history of the First Lady and how that position's evolved in the White House, and what the connection between having a non-elected official, but somebody who still does very much focus in the public eye of the American people, and what their role is to represent the country. So,
wow. So who would your favorite First Lady be?
Ooh. I'm going to have to go with, based off of the content of the panel, Dolly Madison.
I thought you were going to say Grace Coolidge. Anyone else a favorite session from the last few days?
He brought up First Ladies, and last night we got to see First Lady Laura Bush speak, and I think that was pretty incredible. I love a good laugh, so that laughter session was really great.
Well, Genevieve, you've been involved with us for quite some time, and we today unveiled a great project that you've been working with us to roll out, and it had its world debut today.
It did.
Tell us about that.
We've been working on a project called The American Presidents. It's a song and an accompanying video. It originally came out over 16 years ago, but has been recently re-released. And what it does is essentially teach students and young professionals about the presidents, the order of the presidents, a little bit about them. And it's a tool to help children as they grow up understand who's been in this office before, some of the relevant historical factors around the time periods in which they operated. And it's going to be in schools across the country. So really excited for it to be fully live now.
Well, Royce, you've been involved with us for quite some time as well, and I often refer to you as the voice of the voiceless. Share what I mean by that.
In 2016, at the DNC convention, Michelle Obama said that she wakes up every day in a house built by slaves. From there, from what I've heard from you and your team, you all were inundated with information pertaining to the presence of what that meant, the slaves, those enslaved that built the White House. And so what you and your team has done is basically created a project focused around slavery in the president's neighborhood. And as a voice of one of the voiceless, I was able to have an opportunity to be one of the voices for 3 new Wayside exhibits that they now have outside Lafayette Park in front of the White House, where you can go and hear the interactive history of the park, hear Jacqueline Kennedy's mission of preserving that park in the area around the White House, more specifically talking about those slaved and enslaved that built the White House, toiled, blood, sweat, tears to build the White House that we know today. And so having that opportunity as a descendant of slaves was not only just, it took me back to be able to understand that these people probably never thought that someone would be telling their story, but future generations and renditions of this work might include descendants of those enslaved people that built the White House. And so I'm excited to be a part of the program and the project and to see where the future of it goes.
Thank you. That's really inspirational to hear. Well, you've all heard this week different perspectives on White House history, different roles like that of the First Lady and the Chiefs of Staff. But you are the experts on your generation. How would you take what we do and share it better and more widely and engage more people of your generation in understanding and appreciating the significance and the importance of history?
Really, Stuart, I think the biggest question is just exposure. You know, I think that something like this podcast is a great start for that. It's something that not everybody is going to have an immediate inclination towards history, or specifically White House history. It may not be something that they're going to go out and actively look for all of the time. But I think having the information put in front of them, doing things like the President's Song, are ways to get that information out in front of these people and hopefully, you know, tease them in with a little bit of interesting information, some anecdotes that might humanize people who've served in the White House in the past, and just sharing more about its residents, about what goes on beyond just signing bills in the Oval Office and maybe every once in a while being in the decision room. I think that is a really critical first step to then letting people explore further on their own.
Wow, that's insightful. Anyone else?
I think that we also have to kind of dispel this notion that there's nothing to do with history. Like whenever I tell somebody, you know, oh, I'm a history major, they're always like, the first question is, well, what are you going to do with that? You're not going to make any money. There's no careers in history. And I think that emphasizing that there very much is, and that it's a very integral part of our society, and kind of getting that exposure and having a very clear answer to why history is so important and why there is such a future in it is really important, not only to the continuation of our democracy, but also to a deeper understanding for our society as a whole.
I think that's exactly right. You know, you don't have to be a historian to be a lover of history. And it's finding ways to have that exposure, but then also to make things and events that happen at the White House relevant to any ordinary American or non-American, knowing that the things that happen there are applicable to anyone and everyone. I know one of my favorite things as a student of the University of Alabama is when the football team might go for a national championship and might have the White House as a background. So something as simple as that, but also the many other events that happen at the White House pertaining to sports or not pertaining to sports. There's always something that happens there that we all can have a piece of.
Well, you know, it's interesting that you bring up the White House as a building, and we all know that this is the home to the president and his family. It's the office to the president and his staff. It's the ceremonial stage upon which our nation receives its most important visitors, and it's also a museum where Americans have the opportunity to go through the White House. Have any of you actually visited the White House, and what would be your favorite room, or maybe an experience or a memory of just learning about the White House for the first time?
I recently was able to visit the White House and get a private tour, and I really love the main entryway and the estate dining room. Particularly, I do because I am interested in architectural ornamentation, and those two rooms just have these very beautiful tall ceilings and very grand capitals. And I'm so invested in the craftsmanship of the building. The White House, we need to remember that it's an animate object. It's a living thing, and the craftsmanship that has gone into it needs to be maintained.
So anyone else have a favorite place or memory of the White House?
Going to the White House Easter egg roll as a
Oh,
child.
yes, yes.
So fun. I don't know if any of you guys have been. It's such a unique tradition, but it's an opportunity. You know, the weather's changing in DC. It's springtime, and all these kids just descend in pastels on the White House lawn. It's such a cool experience. There's bunny, moving around. So I've always thought that the building is so extraordinary, but that lawn and just the part of the acres themselves are so stunning.
Anyone else that may have learned about the White House from television or maybe not have been there personally?
My earliest real experience with connection to the White House was probably seeing a picture of my grandmother visiting it. She had this picture of her meeting Laura Bush in her office back in Italy, and she spoke about it with such pride, and it was really an honor for her to have come to America and been to the White House and met the First Lady and the President. And so very early on, I understood the importance of the house and the individuals that live in there.
That's a very special and personal story, and I look forward to taking over there soon. Anyone else?
My great-great-grandfather worked in the White House with Lyndon B. Johnson. I come from a farming family. They say he was one of the only people that would regularly wear cowboy boots in the White House. And he'd always have dirt and stuff on him. And they say he'd always leave a trail wherever he went.
That's great. Well, Sean, I want to stick with you a second. And you are a student at Eureka College, which is the alma mater of President Reagan.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that you are a tour guide at his childhood home.
Yes.
What is it like to be on a college campus where you have students of all perspectives, maybe not all Ronald Reagan Republicans, but how do they view someone who's one of their own that went on to become a president of the United States? Do you think they're a little more aware of the White House and the presidency because of that?
I think we're very small. We have 408 students at the moment. And I think they're way more aware of what's going on politically in general, what's going on in the world. They take great pride in President Reagan because we stand on a foundation of our professors and the staff and faculty telling us, like, the 40th president of the United States went to this college. You know, you can start here at this tiny school and do anything. You really can. And we have many, many, many other stories to tell about people that have gone to Eureka and went on to do amazing things.
Well, Mrs. Kennedy famously said, "The White House belongs to the American people." What does that phrase mean to you?
I think it's a reflection not just on the building of the White House itself, but more broadly on the institution, the White House, and those who fill it. You know, one thing that comes to mind for me, and this is, maybe tying in a story of mine that I like about the White House, is just this idea that the president should be really ingrained and in touch with the people who elected him or perhaps her later in the future. And, on that note, when I was reading President Coolidge's autobiography for the first time several years ago at this point, one thing that really stood out to me was a passage about his time in the presidency where he mentioned going out every morning and shaking hands with whoever was standing out on the steps, out just looking to see the White House. And he always had this sense that the president was there to serve the people, and if they were there to see him, it was his duty to stay to the last minute. And so he'd reschedule afternoon meetings if needed until the last hand was shaken. And so that just always sticks out in my mind as kind of an example of something that's so intimately associated with the White House, with the presidency, but also just this sense that the president is a member of the American public, is beholden to the American public, and probably will eventually return to being just a citizen of the United States.
Wow. Anyone else on that thought of Mrs. Kennedy's quote?
I think you're exactly right. We get to pick not only the president of the United States, but the occupant of the White House for 4 years or 8 years. And so we have the chance, a part of our democracy, to have that choice. And with the White House being the people's house, as Mrs. Kennedy said, we have the chance to dictate policy. We have a chance to dictate what occurs throughout those 4 or 8 years in the White House. But then on top of that, we also have the chance to interact with that, whether that's visiting in a tour or a virtual format that the association might have set up. And so I think that is one of the special parts that the association does, is not only preserve and protect the White House, but then also to share that history, share that knowledge of what happens and occurs there every day, from something current or something that might have happened at the inception of the White House. It, to me, is what is the symbol of American diplomacy and democracy. It's where we welcome our guests. It's where we host state dinners. And so to me, anything that happens in our country most likely might have been thought of or envisioned within the White House, or might have just occurred at the White House. So it's really special for us to be able to have a piece and a part of that, either through the association or just looking something up about the White House or watching a video about it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. Anyone else?
I think any American who steps into the White House feels at home and feels important and can find something that they relate to personally.
Anyone else? Ning?
I'm gonna say, first of all, my major is finance, so it's not relevant to history or anything like that. But the thing is, when I joined the event, I found that it's very interesting because I noticed that the White House belongs to all American, and we know more about the history, more about the presidents, and which is a good thing for the young generation.
Let's do a little bit of verbal tweeting. With a limited number of characters in your vocabulary, describe what this week has meant to you, experientially, learning-wise, knowledge-wise. In just a few words, how would you convey in a verbal tweet what the Presidential Site Summit has been about?
I think it's twofold, personally. On one hand, we have the connection with all these different presidential sites. I go to school in DC, and a lot of them are nearby, which I have never really
You're over
ventured.
your characters.
No, sorry. I got scared for a second. So one hand is teaching me about these sites that I'm now going to go visit.
Yes.
But the second part is definitely meeting the next gen leaders and then kind of getting together with them to form a closer group going
Wow,
forward.
that's great.
I would say informative and inspirational. There's no doubt there's been some great panels, learned a lot about history, but also getting to hear from the chiefs of staff and getting to meet this group of people has been an inspiration, both in seeing what's been done in government and the potential to do so going forward.
Wow. Lindsay, how about you?
Being surrounded by people who are doing with their life what I want to do with mine has been truly inspirational. And it's honestly been the first time that I felt like I could actually make a career out of history. So it's really been extremely rewarding.
Well, I too majored in history, and I too was asked, what are you going to do with that? But that kind of worked out pretty well for me. Any of you have any career shifts or any career targeting that came out of this that you might want to modify your trajectory based on your experiences this week?
I can share something, which is the company that I work on now is all about helping young adults navigate adulthood. And so it's mostly personal finance, healthcare, things along those lines. But it struck a chord with me this week that we need to also talk about civics and make sure that people understand how to register to vote, what jury duty is, understanding more about just the systems of government, and that there's ways that we can use technology to bring a lot of those topics to the next generation.
Wow, that is really terrific. And your business is really compelling. I wish I'd had the benefit of that when I was a student in college.
Thanks.
Well, Royce, you're spending your spring break here at the Presidential Site Summit, which is a great thing to do.
Right.
When you go back and your friends are talking about being at the beach or wherever they were this week, how will you convey to them that what you did was the most meaningful thing that you could have been doing this week?
I think for me, it was being able to realize that whether you're a presidential site or a lover of presidential history, American history, White House history, there was something at this summit that anyone could take, whether that's talking about civic discourse and civic engagement, or it's just having an understanding about the history of the presidents and their mindsets and whether or not history repeats itself, having that discussion. But then also I think one of the biggest things that I've gotten from not only being in Dallas, but being a part of the summit is a group of 7 people that I hadn't been able to meet in person before. We had met virtually, but being able to now know that across the country, there's people like me or those that aren't like me that have interest in the same things that I might, or might have completely opposite interests, that we can now kind of find some similarity and hopefully, be that next generation of people, not only just because we're part of a next gen program, but be that next generation of people that are able to go out into all of our various fields and have some sense of connectivity, and that being this week that we spent together. So I'm excited about not only what we do from this, but also what all the sites end up doing. I think I have some more vacation spots for next spring break that I'll be able to do next year. And that's visit some of these presidential sites, but then also be able to have a lot of relationships with those different sites and then this group of people.
Have any of you visited other presidential sites other than the White House or Washington? What are some of them that you've been to?
So Reagan Library is a favorite.
Yes.
It's most beautiful library on the hill, just with so much history, but also so much to do. I think that's what's so exciting about these presidential libraries now is that they're so interactive.
Absolutely.
And so history really comes to life. You can even, in the Reagan Library, you can go inside Air Force One, Marine One, like all of these amazing real parts of history and sort of explore, which has been, it's pretty cool.
That's great.
Reagan's great.
Tyler, have you been to the Coolidge site?
Yes, yeah. Perhaps unsurprisingly, I've been to both the Coolidge House location in DC, but maybe more notably the birthplace site up in Plymouth Notch, Vermont. And I think that's a really cool operation up there. It's run by the state of Vermont. They've pretty much restored the town to how it would have been when he was born there. So there's a cheese factory. They still make cheese really good up there. And you can visit both the little cabin in which he was born. There's the homestead in which he was sworn in by his father.
Well, that's an amazing story that I think we should amplify. You think, why was he sworn in there? Well, Warren Harding died unexpectedly on a trip out west, and word got back to Vice President Coolidge, who was at his home state, and was wakened in the middle of the night, the judge was summoned, and he was given the oath of office to be the President of the United States. Pretty remarkable.
Absolutely. And fun fact about that, he's also the only president to be sworn in by his father, because his father was in the vicinity. He was visiting home and had a position that allowed him to have the authority to swear Calvin into office.
That's right.
Wow.
But I will say, to be sure, once he got back to Washington, they did have him sworn in by an official judge to make sure it took. Any other sites that you may have visited?
Yeah, Springfield, Lincoln Library. I've also been to, Mount Vernon, Monticello, Highland. So many different places, and I've enjoyed them all. Monticello, I was just there in November, and that is it's an amazing site. They have a brand new exhibit for the enslaved people that worked at Monticello, and it's absolutely amazing.
Well, I do think that these places, as you visit them, do have some sort of impact on you. I have actually hanging out on my office wall in Washington a picture of my 5th grade class trip to Washington, D.C., and we're on the Capitol lawn. And I have very vivid memories of going to the Capitol, the White House, Mount Vernon. And I don't know that really influenced my career and my interest, but I really do think it had some impact. And I think it's so important for students of any age, whether you are a 5th grader like I was then or my role now, to visit these sites and learn about history. Whenever I take a road trip, I look along the way to see what birthplace or childhood home there is, and it really brings to life these presidents and these first ladies that I just knew as a president of the United States, but these were real people coming from real places, and they have a whole life story that is really compelling. And I'm so excited to be working with you guys and to learn from you and to experience the presidency and the White House through your eyes as well. Well, let's wrap up with a sort of a lightning round question and put you on the spot a little bit. If you could have dinner tonight with any president or first lady from history, who would it be and why? And let's go in the same order we did introductions. Emily?
Sure. I have to say Eleanor Roosevelt. I just feel that she was such a down-to-earth person who really spoke her mind, and she didn't have an easy life, but she had such a high degree of emotional intelligence. I think we all have a lot to learn from her and continue to learn from her today.
I think for me, mine would be Lyndon Johnson. Not only am I partially a namesake, my middle name is Lyndon, but I think his story from his rise and time in Texas, working his way up through office, and not only the triumphs that he had within his presidency and becoming president, but also the tragedy that happened that made him president. And him being able to take that and use the death of President Kennedy to be able to push through legislation that may or may not have been popular to his home state or the South as a whole, and being able to continue to push through. And I think he's a true example of not only the effectiveness of the presidency, but then also, how oftentimes you might have a sleepless job and the responsibility is one that transcends politics, but also just standing up and doing what's right for the time period. I think he's a great example of that.
George Washington. I think just better understanding what it was like in the true formative time of this country and all of the challenging decisions and sort of questions that he had to address, and sort of him being the first leader to step away from the presidency and really set the stage for what was to come. I think it would be a pretty amazing experience.
For me, I think it would have to be Mary Todd Lincoln, not only to give insight into one of the most pivotal presidencies of all time in our history, but also because we've recently heard about how wrongfully she was treated. You know, she's a woman that suffered extreme tragedy throughout her life, and people viewed her as crazy and even committed her to a psych ward, I believe. And just to hear more about what her husband's presidency was like and what her experience was like throughout that would be most interesting to me.
I think I've talked enough about President Coolidge already. So we had a conversation about this earlier. I think I go with President Theodore Roosevelt, because I'm pretty sure if I were having dinner with him, it wouldn't be sitting down at a dinner table. We'd probably be trekking somewhere across the country, and sure not to be boring.
That's great.
Mine has to be Dolly Madison. I've done a lot of research on her. I've read a lot of her letters, and at the end of almost every letter she ever wrote about her personal life, she always said, "Please burn this when you're done." And I would really love to know what happened in all of those letters that were in fact burnt, that we don't have access to.
I think we probably all know mine. It's Ronald Reagan. He had a set of values that never left him. His oldest son, Michael, came to the birthplace about, I think it was 10 years ago, and he looked up at the room that he was born in, and he goes, "My father really never left that room." He had that set of values. You go look at people that go look at the ranch in California. It's almost identical somewhat to the apartment that he lived in when he was born. So he never really lost that.
For me, I'm gonna say that is Barack Obama, because what he has done so far during his presidency was great, and what he did was very inspiration. So I'm gonna have the dinner with Barack Obama.
Well, Stuart, we got to meet a First Lady yesterday, First Lady Laura Bush, but you have the chance to work with presidents and First Ladies. Who would you pick?
Well, thank you, Royce, putting me on the spot.
Yeah.
Well, I would have to say Jackie Kennedy. Here is a woman who founded our organization. Pretty amazing. She was 32 years old when her husband becomes president of the United States, not much older than you are today. And she was First Lady for such a short period of time due to the tragedy of the assassination. But what she put in place at such a young age, in such a short period of time, is still what governs historic preservation, conservation, and acquisition at the White House today. And she inspired our work. She founded our organization that has benefited now 12 presidencies since that time. And we are her living legacy in White House history. And it's an honor and a privilege to have that role. And I would love to just have a quiet dinner somewhere and ask her, how did you come up with this? And you probably assumed that your husband would be president for 4 years or 8 years, but yet you did it all early. So it was done, and you handed it on to Mrs. Johnson and then Mrs. Nixon, and so on and so on and so on until my role. I've now had the privilege to work with President and Mrs. Obama, President and Mrs. Trump, and President and Dr. Biden. And our role is exactly the same no matter who the President and First Lady may be. And as you've come to know through your role with us, it's a privilege to do this on behalf of the American people. And I really look forward to continuing that work and having you help us reach more young Americans to share your passion and your vision. In this day and time, you watch the news and it's tough. It's a hard world out there. And it's challenging not to be cynical about the future. But you inspire me and you give me hope about the future of our country. And I'm excited about you working with us on the mission of the White House Historical Association. So thanks to each of you for this conversation today. And thanks for being at the Presidential Sites Summit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thank you, Stuart.
Thanks,
We're
Charles.
delighted to be here.
Thank you. So that wraps it up from here in Dallas, Texas, where we've been here to convene the Presidential Sites Summit. Well, as promised, Genevieve is going to reveal her special video that we launched today. And you'll be singing it in your head as you go to sleep tonight, I promise. Thank you very much.
America's president #1, Founding Father Washington, John Adams, second president, the very first White House resident.
Thomas Jefferson, number 3, doubled the size of our country. Madison led us, number 4, through the 1812 war. James Monroe is number 5, his Monroe Doctrine still survives.
Another Adams, John Quincy, rose to the 6th presidency.
7, Andrew Jackson was a frontier common man. Number 8, Van Buren, first president born an American.
Harrison 9 passed away 1 month after inaugural day.
John Tyler, president number 10, established the White House Guardmen.
James K. Polk 11 looked to western expansion.
Taylor, 12 of the Army, nicknamed Rough and Ready. 13, Fillmore in his eyes, best for all was a compromise.
14, Franklin Pierce is here, the Civil War is drawing near.
James Buchanan, 15,
the one bachelor we've ever seen.
16, Lincoln, Honest Abe, fought the war that freed the enslaved. 17, Andrew Johnson started Reconstruction.
18, Union General Grant had led his troops with good judgment.
19, President R.B. Hayes,
sworn in on 2 separate days. Garfield, number 20,
killed while in his presidency. Chester Arthur, 21,
sought reform and got it done. Grover Cleveland, 22,
remember him 'cause he's not through. 23, Harrison comes again.
It's William's grandson, Benjamin. Grover Cleveland, 24,
ran for the White House, elected once more. Here's McKinley, 25, the 20th century had arrived. Teddy Roosevelt, 26, speak softly and carry a big stick.
27, Taft we see, biggest man in the presidency.
Woodrow Wilson, 28, thought a League of Nations was great. 29, Harding, post-World War I, normalcy promised to everyone.
Calvin Coolidge, 30,
taught one and all frugality.
Herbert Hoover, 31,
oh no, the Depression had begun. Franklin Roosevelt, 32, with his New Deal the country grew. Harry Truman, 33, one with atomic energy.
Eisenhower, 34,
commanded in the Second World War.
35, John Kennedy, assassinated in 63.
36, Johnson Lyndon B. He declared a war on poverty. 37, Nixon went far, opening China and the USSR.
Gerald R. Ford, 38, moved the nation forward past Watergate.
39 with all his might. Carter fought for human rights. Reagan 40 from the West taught the world that freedom's best.
Bush 41 showed solid form, freed a nation in Desert Storm.
42 Bill Clinton, president through the millennium. George W. Bush, number 43, strengthened homeland security. First to be elected of African descent, Obama, 44th president.
Donald Trump, the 45th head of state, an entrepreneur of real estate.
46 Joe Biden, here we see, now he leads our country.